This is Monica Main, and I wanted to let you know that I just completed my last boot camp seminar, and many of my students wanted me to actually post up a map for them to be able to download and basically print out for their use of finding property deals. And I wanted to go one step further and actually do a short video to show you some of the hot areas right now. Right now, we are in the fall of 2010, and of course, this changes dramatically like every 3 to 6 months. And so I will tell you that all of the areas that you see color coded here are going to be changing as time goes on. So this is not a permanent fixture. And so therefore, you should definitely be, I guess you could say, farming your deals in your specific area, especially if you're in one of these areas that are highlighted as yellow. Now let me explain the colors. Green means go, obviously. Yellow means caution, and red means absolutely not. So as you can see, the majority of the map here is yellow, and then of course we have our green areas and the red areas. Now let me first explain the red areas and why they are red. As you can see, you have this side of the map over here, which we have New York. The problem with New York, especially upstate New York, is that it's fairly depressed. It's usually depressed in a normal real estate market, so forget about it being depressed in a bad real estate market. It's already depressed before we're even in any kind of recession anyway. I have cohorts of mine and associates who own property, especially in upstate New York, and they never tend to do well in any kind of economy because of the issues that they have in upstate New York. Manhattan and that particular area, a lot of the properties are overpriced even in our current economy, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep looking, especially if you live in that area. So if you live in Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, you could still look to see if you could find lucrative property deals. But again, most of those people are they're not letting go of their properties, and therefore you're going to find very low cap rates for the most part, okay? And so Pennsylvania is pretty much out because Philadelphia seems to be losing a lot of population, but the unemployment rate is very, very high in comparison to the national average. And in Pittsburgh, that's a different story because it seems like massive amounts of people are actually exiting Pittsburgh to the point where it's getting scary because it's pretty much one very large board up city, much like Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, as you know, only was dependent on one industry, which was the car manufacturing industry, or the American car manufacturing, I should say, rather. And therefore, it's just not recommended to go into Michigan at all. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to get funding from a conventional lender for any kind of deal in Michigan. And so if you live in Michigan, you might want to consider possibly investing elsewhere. Ohio is now red. A lot of the areas in Ohio are now having highly eroding populations, especially in Cincinnati and Cleveland. And so, if you were interested in an Ohio property, you could still do it, especially if you stick with like Columbus, for example, or do research to figure out if the population where you want to go is eroding or not. But if you're in any area, and this applies to any of these areas, if you're in any area where the population is eroding by 5 to 10% a year, you do not want to invest there, period. So that's one of the things you need to do research on, either local research or through the U.S. Census Bureau website that the government has, to find out what the current population is and how much it's changed in the last 10 years. Because if there are fewer people now than there was 10 years ago by a very large percentage or even 10%, that's a lot of people to lose in 10 years, okay? So you want to stay away from areas that are losing population, and you want to stick with areas that are gaining population, okay? Because all of those people that are moving out of the Pittsburgh and the Philadelphia areas and Cincinnati and Cleveland and Detroit, they're all going somewhere, and they all tend to be moving around the country and to areas like Atlanta, Georgia. They're all going to like Texas, the major cities in Texas like Houston or Dallas, Fort Worth. A lot of them are going to St. Louis. A lot of them are going to Chicago. So you have to look at the areas that these people are going to be able to determine which areas are actually expanding in population, okay? So we have Indiana, which you have to stay away from the border of Michigan because it's really going to get hard to try to get funding in those particular areas. But you do have areas that you probably wouldn't prefer to invest, like for example, East Chicago or Gary, Indiana, that seem to be D-class areas, but they tend to be very, very profitable. So those would be the last places that people would want to look for property. But if you live in that area, say you're in the Chicago area or live in Indiana or even Ohio or Michigan, you might want to consider East Chicago in that area or even Indianapolis because those are pretty good areas, solid areas to invest. But you want to stay off the border of Michigan right here, because it's going to be difficult to find funding for those types of property deals. And so then you're in Illinois. You can't really be in the city of Illinois to find really good high cap rate properties, but you can find stuff in Joliet, Roxford, and different areas surrounding even the southern, or I guess you could say southern or western suburbs of Chicago. You can actually find quite a bit. Now, again, you're going to be dealing with C and possibly D class areas, but those are cash cow areas right now. Not a lot going on in Springfield, Illinois, but if you live in Springfield, you're going to be the ultimate expert. And this goes to every single one of you that's maybe in an area that's red or even yellow. Whereas you're going to be the ultimate expert in finding out whether or not you have a good cash flow potential in the area that you live in. So you should always look in your local area. So don't take my word for any of this. Look at your local area first. Start doing some LoopNet research to figure out what your average cap rate is. But if you're finding your average cap rate is 7% or below as you're looking through your listings on the MLS, then you're probably not going to be able to find anything that's a good cash flow in that area. Or if you pull it up and you say, for example, you do type in Springfield, Illinois, and find that there are not that many properties that are multifamily, or if you're trying to do commercial, whatever your forte or specialty is going to be, then you probably aren't going to be finding much in that area anyway. Okay, so that's, you are the end all when it starts the research process, especially if any of these areas are in your own backyard. Okay, then you have Missouri. You have the outskirts of St. Louis. Again, you're dealing with D-class areas, especially when you get into East St. Louis. However, again, cash cow opportunities galore. Now, all of these other states up here, I really don't know a lot about. They're yellow in that basically I have not seen anything in any of my partnership or bird dog groups come through. I've seen maybe one or two deals in Wisconsin maybe come through. So if you live in Wisconsin, that would be your only excuse as to why you'd look for properties in Wisconsin. But otherwise, if you don't live in Wisconsin, not particularly an area you want to go into. Then you have Minnesota, you have St. Paul that you might want to focus in on. And again, if you live there, start looking. But if you don't live there, not really a good idea to really go there, okay? You have the Dakotas, the Dakotas, South and North Dakota. You have Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas. Kansas should actually be red, but the reason I kept it yellow is because at any point in time it can actually turn around. But I will tell you that there's major problems with basically their entire economy there, especially when you're trying to deal with getting a property into escrow. This has happened a couple of times already with my own students where they have something go into escrow and the property value continues to drop even before they close escrow, and then they're having problems getting their loan. So I kept it yellow even though I had it red before, just because this can change at any time, especially since there's always a bottom at the market, and I think Kansas has probably pretty much touched it, okay? Oklahoma, same exact thing, whereas they're dealing with basically their average appraised value on their property is actually tanking as time goes on. Arkansas, I don't know a lot about the market, so if you live there, you might want to do some research first to see what you can find, but I haven't really seen anything come through that's profitable in that particular area. Texas, if you live there, really good idea to start investing there. You're going to find your best opportunities in Dallas-Fort Worth right now, especially the outskirts, of Dallas-Fort Worth, but also Dallas-Fort Worth itself. Houston is a major issue right now, so unless you're dealing with Banco and REO properties, you're really not supposed to be dealing with Houston. Houston's got some major, major problems, okay? And also, you might want to take a look at San Antonio, Killeen, Texas, Lubbock, Texas. Stay away from El Paso, though, because there tends to be a lot of drug traffic problems and you really don't want to deal with that. Austin, Texas always has low cap rates, so I really don't ever recommend Austin, but you can really focus in on Dallas-Fort Worth. Houston, only if you're dealing with bank-owned properties. And of course, Lubbock, Killeen, Texas, and even Waco, okay? Now you're probably wondering why Louisiana is green. The reason being is because there are opportunities in Louisiana, believe it or not, but you don't really necessarily want to go into New Orleans unless you can actually get a housing grant. There are lots of grants available in Louisiana, especially with New Orleans, if you're trying to rebuild any kind of low-income housing, but that is only regional in Louisiana. So if you're going to try to find a federal grant program for that, guess again, you're not going to be doing that. So you're going to have to go into Louisiana, especially New Orleans in that particular area, to see what kind of grant programs you could take advantage of. But that's why this whole state is green, because there's a lot of advantages here. There's lots of opportunity. Mississippi, stick with the main cities. Alabama, same thing. You want to stick with Montgomery, Birmingham. Those particular areas are really good. Of course, with Georgia, you have Atlanta and Macon, even Columbus, that are doing really well. You have any of these areas here, Virginia and the Carolinas, as long as you're staying inland from the water, because the water's overpriced and the cap rates are really low. So as long as you're staying with the major cities here, inland, then you're going to be doing really well. Tennessee, with the exception of Memphis, Memphis is very, very, very depressed, much like Detroit or even Phoenix right now. Okay, so stay away from Memphis, but if you stick with Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga, really, really good, solid cash flow areas. Not a lot of information that I know about Kentucky or West Virginia. Maryland and DC, I will tell you that the majority of what you'll find in that particular area, it will be in the outskirts of the city. So you're not going to find anything directly in Baltimore or directly in DC, but you will have to stick with the outskirts. And again, unless you live there, I don't really recommend you start farming that area, okay? Arizona, we have the issues with Phoenix and the whole immigration thing. Arizona, Phoenix in particular, was overbuilt to begin with, and then when they lost the majority of their population because a lot of the immigrants left, and apartment building owners didn't want to own any apartments there because they were fined if they had immigrants in their apartments that were not legal. So it just really tore up that entire area. I don't really see a lot of promise for it as of right now. I'm not saying forever, I'm just saying right now. Las Vegas, not really a good idea. Not a lot of opportunity because a lot of the major investment groups are coming in to buy up all the bank-owned properties. And so you're going to be competing directly with people that have tons and tons of cash to put into these deals. And they're basically buying these Vegas properties knowing they're going to go up in the future. So they're buying them just to let them sit there for a few years. And you don't want to compete with that. California, Southern California is pretty much out unless you're going to focus on Riverside or San Bernardino counties. Otherwise, you might want to consider Bakersfield, Fresno, San Jose, and even Sacramento. Okay, so those are really the hopping spots right now for California. And Oregon, Washington, really nothing's ever come out of those areas. Idaho, it's a really solid area for cash flow, especially if you're going to deal with Boise, for example. But again, it seems like everybody seems to be jumping on those opportunities. So listings seem far and few between. So unless you're in that immediate area, or maybe you're in Washington or Oregon or Montana or Wyoming or in this area here and you can't find anything in your local area, because you should always start in your local area first, even if this is yellow or red, okay? With the exception of a couple places like Detroit, probably Vegas, definitely Phoenix and Memphis. So if you live in those particular areas directly, then you probably shouldn't start in your own backyard. But otherwise, you should always start in your own backyard. I've never really seen anything good come out of Colorado. Cap rates are extremely low. Same with Utah. I get a lot of deals coming through, and they just never seem to work from a cash flow standpoint. And the problem with Florida, which is my favorite place in the whole country, is that the LTVs, lenders are only giving you 65%, so that means you have to come up with 35% down. So this is going to tank the market over the next year or so. So just watch and wait. Now is the time to watch and wait. You don't want to be jumping into Florida, because in a year from now, you're going to get a lot of good deals here as the prices start dropping, because sellers cannot sell their property. So they're just going to keep dropping them and dropping them and dropping them just to be able to get interested investors to come in. So even though you can still get good deals, especially on bank-owned properties, you're still going to have to shell out 35% down on these properties here in Florida. And so wait a year, because you can really get some good deals next year. So I hope this sort of helps everybody as far as looking at this map. And again, this map changes every 3 to 6 months. And so just since we are in the fall of 2010, make sure that you check back so that I have new maps up and I could do this again probably early in 2011. This is Monica Main signing off, and I'll see you at the top.